good morning. We're going to be in 2 Samuel chapters 6 through 10 today. So last time we talked about sort of the rise of David's kingdom. That is, the first 5 chapters of 2 Samuel are how David slowly acquires power and first becomes king of Judah and then becomes king of Israel later on. And we set up some sort of lingering things that we're going to have out there. So let me first start there. Okay, so the 2 kings at the beginning of the book are Saul and David. And Saul has his son Jonathan and his son Ishbaal. And Jonathan, we're going to find out, has a son called Mephibaal. Okay? But Saul and Jonathan die in battle, which is the Battle of Gilboa, if I remember correctly. Let me go back and check. Yes, at Gilboa. And Ishbaal is assassinated. So, by Abner, I think. It's Abner. I'm not sure. I've probably written it down on this page so I can remember which one it was. No, it's 2 of those. Okay. So, that was the context we had in 2 Samuel chapters 1 through 5, was that essentially Saul's lineage is basically erased, right? Saul and his sort of chosen crown prince, Jonathan, die at the Battle of Gilboa, and so David is proclaimed king of Judah. Ishbaal is proclaimed king of Israel, and again we talked about last time that has to do with the allegiances that people had, right? David is from the tribe of Judah, and Saul is from the northern tribes, and so they went with the person that was from their area, basically. But Ishbaal is then assassinated, and David then kills his assassins, right? And so David has basically, one way or the other, swept off all of his competition, and has unified the kingdoms together. We talked about last time that the 2 kingdoms were probably never united. They were just in a personal union under Saul and then a personal union under now David. But we're going to come back and talk about Mephibaal in just a second when we see as it progresses. Okay, so when we ended chapter 5, we basically realized that all of the tribes all of the peoples around Israel. So we have Galilee, Dead Sea. Here's Jerusalem kind of in the middle, spelled correctly. Israel is sort of the land to the north of Jerusalem. Judah is the land to the south of Jerusalem. That's why he picks Jerusalem as his capital, because it's kind of on the borderline, and basically he's trying to initiate the idea that they will be a united kingdom under his dynasty. And we also heard last time that Tyre, which is this nation up here, and their king Hiram sends goods to David and basically builds him a house. And basically what that is that's the nice way of saying that I recognize you as the rightful ruler of my neighbors, and I want to have peace with you, and I don't want to have any problems. And the same thing we see at the end of chapter 5, in that the Philistines, so Philistia is right here, is the neighbors, and they were who basically were the problems for Saul, his entire kingdom. And the Philistines were also problems for all of Israel during the time of the judges. Little boy who is my son, you're going to have to be quiet if you want to be here for the lesson. You're going to have to go away. Bye-bye. Sorry. My son came creeping in the back of the frame. Anyway, so life in a real church. Okay, so Philistia is this region in the south that sort of is between the Mediterranean and where Judah is, and they also try to have peace, but David is not going to have a part of that. Basically, the Philistines and the Israelites and Judeans are going to just be at war, and so he goes and he attacks them as well. Now that's going to be a key feature as we progress through 2 Samuel, because when David has to flee, he will have to decide whether he goes back, whether he crosses over to Philistia, or whether he tries to cross over into the eastern side of the Jordan River, where he can be safe. And we didn't talk about this very much, but he had previously been in Philistia when Saul was in power, and so that's why the Philistines tried to make peace with him, because he had sort of been their ally for a little bit. But now that he's over the people, he's sort of set his allegiance. No, you're not my allies. I was just basically using you while I was escaping from Saul. Okay, with that. So the issue is that David goes up against the Philistines. Okay, so let me put it over here on my map so I can draw my thing over here. Right. So it's David versus the Philistines. Now, if you go back to Judges, chapter, I think it's going to be, let's see, where is it? Oh, yes, if you go back to, that's where it was, I lost it there. It's not Judges, it's 1 Samuel, I apologize. 1 Samuel chapter 5, that's why I was confused. The last time the Israelites and the Judeans went up against the Philistines, they took the Ark of the Covenant with them, and that Ark was lost to the Philistines for a time. Right? This is when they put it before the statue of Dagon, and the Dagon statue falls. And in that whole scene is about the power of Israel's God versus the Philistine God. A similar thing is going to happen here, that David is going to take the Ark with him against the Philistines and sort of battle them when he goes to Philistia. And then when he comes back, he is proven victorious. Now, this is sort of the last sign of David's enthronement, right? He goes up against the Philistines, he invokes the power of the ark to kind of protect his army, and it works this time, which it didn't work when they went up with Hophni and Phinehas. And so this is signaling that God has approved and sort of sealed David's kingdom as the right kingdom. Again, we're all making this, the whole book of Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, is making this whole case that David is the rightful ruler and his descendants should sit on the throne forever. Right? That's the promise we're going to see in a few chapters in 2nd Samuel. That promise becomes explicit there. But that's the whole movie arc is building up to this point where David is the rightful ruler. He's the rightful ruler because he's accepted by his own people, Judah. He's accepted by the other people, Israel. He's accepted by the neighbors, which we just saw. And now he's accepted by God. Now, this chapter here, these chapters we're talking about today, we can see as the height of David's kingdom. And what becomes very interesting about this is that this ark, is going to come back down. Like every roller coaster, it goes up and it comes back down. Right now, we're here in this little section at the peak of the roller coaster. Everything is good, nothing is going wrong. It's all about to fall apart in chapter 11, by the way. So, while we're in the good times, let's talk about the good times. Okay, so David takes the ark, and then he wants to, since God has approved of him, and we know that because he wins the battle, that's how you understand that, is that he's now going to take the ark back to his capital city and basically bring God home. Right? Now, the question we should ask ourselves in the context of sort of the inter-biblical dialogue between the different books is God going home or is God moving to a new home? Okay, so Deuteronomy wants you to think of it as God is going home, as in he was always supposed to be in Jerusalem. But the point is this historical books like 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, the book of Samuel, Jerusalem wasn't their home yet. It was a foreign land. David has to conquer it and make it the capital. It wasn't already Saul's capital. And so I'm going to say that David is moving God to a new home. What he's doing is he's centralizing the idea of the priesthood and the tabernacle at this time and God's dwelling in Jerusalem. Why does he do that? For politics, right? He's making a political statement. God approves of me, and in fact, he's going to live next door to me. That's how much he approves of me. He's going to be my next door neighbor, right? And so we're going to build the temple of God here so that Israel, basically, again, it's a unifying thing, right? Where God dwells is what keeps Israel and Judah as one united nation. And so if everyone comes to Jerusalem and worships God in David's capital, then David and his lineage become the rulers of both nations forever, right? So in fact, David may be sort of going ahead and making the promise that God's going to give to David comes after the fact that David has already promised that God's going to do this to him. Do you see what I'm saying? Right? Like he's already he's setting the chessboard in such a way that it appears to everyone that God approves of his reign. That's going to be key when we get into Kings, when the kingdoms divide up. Because the whole idea of why Israel, the northern kingdom, goes off into idolatry, scare quotes on that, is because they won't worship they won't worship God in Jerusalem, they worship God somewhere else. And because where God dwells is the political center of the nation. And so later on we get to that, and Jeroboam builds his own temple in the northern kingdom. He does so because he doesn't want his people going down to Judah and worshiping God there. He wants them to worship God in his nation so that he can say that God approves of him. You see, so it's all, where God dwells is a very political statement, right? In many ways, it's the other golden rule. He who holds the golden box where God dwells rules. That's the idea. Okay, so in chapter 6, David's going to take up the ark from where it was and try to bring it to a city. And here's where we first start seeing a little bit of the cracks in the beautiful picture. David is peaking right now. And we're seeing that a downfall is about to come. Okay, so let me jump right into that. Now David gathered his chosen men of Israel, 30,000. David arose and went with all the people who were with him to Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the very name of the Lord of hosts, enthroned above the cherubim. And they placed the ark of God on a new cart, that they might bring it from the house of Amminadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahiah, the sons of Amminadab, were leading the cart. Now, this picture right here, this is why I want you to go back and look at 1 Samuel 5. Because the last time the ark moved from this house, two sons of the priest were taking it. Hophni and Phinehas took the ark out. God kills them, kills everyone else in the battle, gives the ark to the Philistines, and then the Philistines put it on a cart to bring it back. So now we're reversing that. So David puts it on a cart, and two sons are now leading it back. Right? We have a perfect mirroring of what brought the ark here. So we're finishing the ark, A-R-C, of the ark, A-R-K, by doing exactly what happened before. But here's where it goes wrong. And they put it on the hill and brought it up there, and Ahiah was working. And David and all the house was celebrating before the Lord with all kinds of instruments, right? Because you always have to, they were having a military parade. God is coming victoriously back to his capital city. David's capital city is now going to be God's capital city. It's all right with me. Okay, so we're bringing God in procession, right? The Queen of England's on her carriage, and we're taking her to the Parliament to enthrone her. And this is where it goes wrong. Verse 6. But when they reached the threshing fold of Nacon, Uzzah reached out towards the ark of God and took a hold of it because the oxen had nearly upset it. That is, okay, they're riding in a cart and there's no shock absorbers, right? And so they've hit a bump and the oxen have caused the ark to start rocking and it looks like it's going to fall over. So Uzzah reaches up with his hand to stop it. But the problem is he's not supposed to touch the box because he's not actually a priest. David, if he was paying attention, should have brought the actual priest from Shiloh or from Jerusalem and had actual priests take it. They're taking some dude. This is the dude that was just taking care of it. He's just a Levite. Right? He's of the tribe that's supposed to take care of the things, but he's not of the appropriate part of the tribe to touch the box. And so because of that, verse 7, the anger of the Lord burned against Uzzah, and God struck him down there for his irreverence, and he died there before the ark of God. Right? He reaches up, touches the box. You know, if you've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, he touches the box and he melts or whatever. I mean, he probably doesn't melt. That was just the movie. But he probably, gets electrocuted or something, right? He dies touching the box. Boom, dead. So much for the military conquest parade. Some guy just fell dead on the parade route. Okay? What's David's response to that? Here's where the chink in the armor comes in. David became angry because of the Lord's outburst against Uzzah and called that place Perez Uzzah, which means the breakthrough of Uzzah, where Uzzah is split, right? So I actually think that might be an indication of what happens to Uzzah as he sort of rips apart because of the power of God. I'm not going out there. No one doesn't really tell us how Uzzah dies, but since he calls it the splitting, the name of it is the splitting of Uzzah. Probably the wax melting thing from the Lost Ark would have been a little bit better, but who knows. Anyway, and David was afraid of the Lord that said, and how can the ark of the Lord come to me? And David was unwilling to move the ark of the Lord into the city of David with him, but David took it aside into the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. Okay, so again, we're moving the box where God lives to the wrong place, right? David, why are you messing it up? Right? First, bro, you didn't ask God if he wanted to move to a new house. Second, you had the wrong people moving the box, and now you're going to store the box in someone who's not even a Levite. He's like another dude. He's a Gittite, which may mean that he comes from Gath, and Gath is not part of Israel, it's actually part of Philistia, so he's putting it in a foreigner's house. Why? Because he wants the foreigner, he doesn't want his own people to die, right? So we're just messing it, we're coming over the top of the roller coaster right now is what I'm saying. David is starting to show his true nature, and the kingdom is crumbling. And let me just pause and go over that and say, that's actually good that we see this. We are not getting some whitewashed, perfectly perfect, everyone walks on water kind of narrative here. We're getting a real narrative with real people in it who make mistakes. But we also see that God don't play. And he does not like it when you mess up what he clearly tells you what to do, right? That's the whole thing. But what we're going to see here is that there's an undercurrent here in this part of Samuel. Remember, 1st and 2nd Samuel were one big book. In this part of Samuel, in which, yes, David is the rightful king, but he's not a perfect king. We're going to see that occur more as we come over the ark and we descend the rest of 2 Samuel. Okay. And so then we're going to skip over. I want to make sure I said that. Now, as we go down, David figures out how to properly bring God home. And when he does so, now we're going to see the threat that occurs. Now, what I didn't have on my chart here was the linkage between Saul and David that we saw back in 1 Samuel. So let me bring that up. So Michal, not Michael, Michal, is her name, and she is the daughter of Saul and the wife of David, right? So this is how David actually, probably in a political sense, away from what the text is saying, got to be king, right? Jonathan's dead, Ishbaal's dead, so we can go with the son-in-law to continue the dynasty. Right? So Michal, because she's Saul's daughter authorizes David to become his heir because he's the son-in-law. You remember with me? Okay, so Michal is the wife of David. And when David comes parading in with the thing, he's dancing around in his ephod. Now, an ephod is kind of a weird term, and it's some sort of smock, we'll call it. All right, it's some sort of outer covering that you wear, and it's like an apron or a smock, right? You put it on top of your clothing. But the idea here is that David is dancing only in his ephod. Right? He's naked underneath his smock. And Michal is appalled. Because you're supposed to be the king of Judah and Israel, and you're dancing around in your underwear. Right? The scene about this has to do with David's reverence for God. Right? And so, we're down to verse 20. But when David returned to bless his household, Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "How the king of Israel distinguished himself today." Sarcasm. "He uncovered himself today in the eyes of his servants' maids as one foolish one shamelessly uncovers himself." Right? So this is going to be a key point, because one of the interesting things is this is an allusion back, and I got to find my chapter here. This is what happens when I'm not using the one that has all my notes in it. David is going back to find, is basically becoming a fool. Now the word there, again, I don't have my notes with me, so I have to see if I can have the cross-reference. Okay. Yeah, maybe not coming to it yet. Let me see if it's forward. No, so it should be after that. Okay. So what we missed is in 1 Samuel, we had the issue. So I'm going to put it down as David versus Michal. Right. Let me write that down first before I forget to. That was my next point. Okay. So Michal says, "You look like a stupid person who's embarrassed himself in front of your servants," and that's keying back to David's other wife, Abigail, or Abigail in English, who used to be the wife of the foolish one, Nadav. Did I say his name right? I think I said his name right. Okay. I think I said his name right. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. We'll take it. But Abigail's other husband, his name was Dum Dum, basically. Okay? And he's a dum-dum, and he acts stupid, and David's going to kill him because he's such a stupid guy. And Abigail is the wise woman who sort of negotiates a peace between them. And when she comes home, she tells her husband, "You were so stupid, you almost killed us all in front of David," and he falls over dead. Convenient, because Abigail's going to go marry David. Right? So now, Michal is saying that David is the foolish one. Okay, you track with me? We're pulling, what we're doing is we're pulling the stories of where David's ascendancy is now mirroring itself on the other side. So as he begins to go down, he becomes the person that was the stupid one before, right? He was the wise ruler who the wise woman wants to be with and not with her foolish husband, but now he's the foolish husband, and you say, so, you know, how you have distinguished yourself today. You have uncovered yourself as one does in front of the servants, right? So this is a big, I don't know why this is, but the Bible is particularly sensitive to this idea of nudity as shame, right? Like from Genesis 3, nudity equals shame, right? So if you were stripped naked, then that is how you shame people, right? So when you are processed out, and in fact, that's what Michal is actually probably alluding to, is when you capture like you go to war with another nation and you capture some of their people, you bring them back stripped naked to humiliate them so that you can show how powerful you are. And Michal says, you're supposed to be coming back in victory as the great king and the great warrior, and you look like one of the captured slaves. Because you're so dumb, you're dancing around in your underwear for your God. Right? So the whole context is she's like, what are you doing? And David says to her, it was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all his house to appoint me ruler. I'm emphasizing because I think that's how this is going. Me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Remember, he's from Judah. So not only for my people, but also over Israel. Therefore I will celebrate before the Lord. I will be more lightly esteemed than this, and will humble myself in my own eyes. But with the maids of whom you have spoken, with them I will be distinguished. And it says, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death. Now that's a key point, because what he does is he essentially cuts her off from having an heir. And this is the last straw we're going to see. Finally, David has basically, I'm just going to put a slash through her, by not giving her a son and no heir, he's killing off the end of the house. The house of Saul is now being completely erased, right? Before it was erased by the warriors, or was erased by assassination. Now David's finally getting his hand in. He's like, I'm going to just erase your household. No one from your household will ever be in the throne, right? Because if his son came through Michal, then he would be the heir of both the house of Saul and the house of David. But he's saying, no, it's just going to be my house that will have the heir, right? So again, this is a political statement here. Okay, so then in 7 and 8, David is going to build a temple, right? So he's brought God up, and it's now time for God to have a nice house, right? So, and this is what David says. And it came about that when the king lived in his house, then the Lord had given him rest on all sides from his enemies. And that is a very poetic saying of what the actual political reality is on the ground. Israel is landlocked. They have people who live all around them. Philistia to their west, Egypt to the south, Tyre to sort of the northwest. Over on the other side is where we have some of the tribes of Israel, but also we have these other nations of Moab and Ammon. And then, they're literally surrounded. Israel is a dependent nation because it doesn't have other resources, right? And so when the phrase comes up, the Lord had given him rest on every side from all of his enemies. He literally means there are no one fighting him. He has nothing to do. So David has succeeded as a king in the way that the judges and Saul never did. The judges and Saul never have the phrase, he gave them rest on every side. They get the phrase something like, they gave them rest from their enemy, and it usually says, from Moab, for 30 years. Right, so again, think of this in sort of a military history way, right? It's like, these people are fighting with these people, well, they form a peace treaty, but now they're going to start fighting with these people. Now they're going to start fighting with these people. Now they're going to start fighting with these people, right? But David, the pinnacle of his political career is that he brings peace on all sides where now Israel can be prosperous. And the only way you really do that is if you are as powerful, if not more powerful, than all of your neighbors, right? You only get peace in the sense of being a great king if you are the suzerain. So the suzerain is that's the term that we have. The suzerain is the head dude, and then the vassal is the under dude, right? So you're either the only way you get peace in nations if you're the vassal kingdom, or you're the suzerain kingdom. So you're either the guy in control, or the guy who has an alliance with the guy in control. Right? So you're the top dog or underdog, right? And so this is saying that Israel and Judah are now top dog. They have achieved, and because of that, David wants to build his monument. And so what is he saying? That the king said to Nathan the prophet, "See now, I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells in tent curtains." And Nathan said to the king, "Go, do that which is in your mind, for the Lord is with you." Now, this is the funny part right here. So David is sitting on his throne in his beautiful palace that Hiram, the king of Tyre, has built for him as part of their peace treaty. And he's saying, I want to build a bigger house. I don't want just my palace. I want God's palace, the temple to dwell in. Right? I want God to be my next door neighbor to validate my kingdom and my dynasty forever. Right? That's the political statement that's being made. And so he says to his advisor, Nathan, who's supposed to be his conduit to God, I want to build God a house. And Nathan's like, go ahead. God has given you favor, right? You have peace on all, right? What Nathan's saying is you have peace on all sides. That means God is with you. Right? That's how you know that God wants you to build him a house, because he's given you supremacy over all of your neighbors. Go ahead. But that very night, the word of the Lord came to Nathan. Go and say to my servant David, thus says the house of the Lord, are you the one who will build me a house to dwell in? For I have not dwelled in a house since the day I brought up the sons of Israel from Egypt, even to this day. But I have been moving about in a tent and in a tabernacle. Wherever I have gone with the sons of Israel, did I speak a word to one of the tribes which I commanded to shepherd my people, Israel, saying, why have you not built me a house of cedar? God saying, I didn't say to bring me a house. Who says I want a house? I like my tabernacle tent house. This is the house I've been in for a long time, right? Someone's trying to move grandma into a nice condo and she don't want to go, is what I'm saying, right? That's what's happening here. God's like, I don't want a house. I didn't tell you to build me a house, right? You're building a house because you want to build a house. Because you want a monument to your glory. It's not about me, right? The cracks in our beautiful, Hallmark movie channel movie here are coming through, right? David is not exactly who we thought he was. Again, that's okay, but we need to kind of take apart the, precious moments, soft focus idea of David is this perfect guy who we should always develop. He does a lot of bad things. We're about to see some of those bad things in the next few chapters. Okay. He says, now, therefore, this is what you will say to my servant David. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, to be ruler over my people Israel. I have been with you wherever you have gone and cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make you a great name, like the names of the great men who are on earth. I will also appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them that they will live in their own place and not be disturbed again, nor will wicked afflict them anymore. Right? So the idea is he says, I'm going to give your dynasty a name, and I'm going to give my people a rest in this land. Right? This is the contrast to the judges where they never had rest in the land. He says, but I don't need you to build me a house. When your days are complete, I will raise up your descendant after you, who will come forth from you, and I will establish his kingdom, and he shall build a house for my name. Right? So it's, David, your family, right? You're going to have the idea that your dynasty is going to be the supreme one, and the people are going to have peace under David. That's the political statement. As long as a Davidite is on the throne, Israel will have peace. That's the rhetoric of the book. That's what Samuel was trying to say. You can't kick out the David dynasty from the throne because they're the only way we have peace. And your descendant will do it. Then we have this whole prophet. We have the rest of the prophecy, and part of that prophecy, what we're going to do is we don't have the time to pick it apart. But within the prophecy, there's always this kind of undercurrent of you're not exactly who you think you are, right? You're going to be the great dynasty, and your sons will sit on the throne forever, and blah 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 blah. But not you, David. You're not going to be able to do these things. Your descendants are going to do these things, right? And so. Part of that is, again, I don't have really time to get into that. We gotta move forward just to get through the chapters we have to do today. But that's the point, is that we have this interaction between David and God. It's almost what I'm saying is, the more formulaic it looks, the less real it is. Right? The more it sounds like a Hallmark card where everything goes perfectly fine, and at the end of our sitcom episode, the beaver is fine again, the less it's reality, right? The more it's rhetoric, right? So if you're curious about that, that would be a point in which for you to kind of go line by line and word by word and chart it out and go, okay, does this sound real? This doesn't sound real, because God just said, I don't need you to build me a house. I'm going to have then he turns around and says, but your descendants are going to build me a house. And you're like, okay, where's that? That's true. The Davidites through Solomon are going to build the temple. But what this is getting is, the promise is given to David, but David doesn't get to fulfill the promise, and that's a political statement. That's the undercurrent, is what I'm saying, in which David's a great king, but he's not the best king, is the idea, right? There's basically the writer's saying there's someone better coming, or we had someone different. We call it the dynasty of David, but we really shouldn't do that. Anyway, so that's the point. Okay, so he gets down to chapter 8. Now, chapter 8 is the list of all of David's accomplishments. Right? And this is a very key piece of ancient Near Eastern political rhetoric, basically. This is what kings do. If you go and you look at any of the monuments from Assyria or from Egypt or from the Hittites up in Turkey, this is what kings do. I, insert name of the house of insert name, the son of insert name, made my greatness by, here's my resume. Right, so we just run through it. I defeated Moab. I defeated Hadarezer, the king of Zoab. I defeated the king of Hamath. I defeated the king of the Arameans. I defeated this guy and this guy. I took up 10,000 people from Egypt. I conquered all the land. Right? This is David's war resume of what he did. And he had a war resume before, right? So back in 1 Samuel, he had Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his 10,000s, right? David's a great warrior. That's actually how he got to be king, is what I'm saying. He got to be king because he's a strong military dude, and he killed a lot of people, and he brought peace to the land, right? He's a military ruler, he's not a civilian ruler. That's the contrast that I think was made in the promise, is that David is a military ruler, his son Solomon is a civilian ruler, right? His name is Peace, Shalom, right? And so David is the one who is the great warrior who's going to set the stage for the peaceful civilian government to come into place through his heir. Right? So that's the contrast between David and Solomon. Saul is a warrior, David is a warrior, Solomon is not a warrior. I think that makes him a key candidate for being the best king in Samuel. Anyway, if we're doing an election for this. Okay, so that's that. Now, on the flip side of that, we have David returns to the king. In chapter 9, David returns to the kingdom, or the dynasty of Saul, and so that's sort of our third one, David and Mephibosheth. Now, if you look in your Bible, the name of the son is not Mephibosheth, it's Mephibosheth. But last time, remember that Bosheth is the term that you put into the Bible because you don't want to write the foreign idolatrous names in the thing, right? So the idea is this is why the other son's name was really Ishbaal, but in the text it says Ishbosheth. So whenever this is called emendation, E-M-E-N-D-A-T-I-O-N, emendation. Emendation is where you go in and you fix the text because you don't like something about it, right? This is the literary version of the fig leaf on the statue. Right? Every classical statue, when they brought them into the Victorian period, they had to give them underwear because they were naked. Right? That's why you see pictures, when you see statues that were made during the Victorian period, they were like Cupid or whatever, and it's got like the water coming out, but you don't see what his genitals look like because they carve a fig leaf there. This is the fig leaf. They changed the people's names. Oh, it's Baal? Cross that out. Bosheth. Right? So they because Bosheth means foolishness or wickedness, right? And so they tell you, like it's a wink, wink, nod, nod. It's the dang nabbit of biblical naming, basically, right? So his name is really Ishbaal and Mephibosheth. But they come in here and they went, we'll call it Bosheth, right? We're going to fix his name because we don't want to have those names in the text, right? So this clearly says, again, this is another indication that the text is being, corrected, quote unquote, so that it has the best light. Because we wouldn't want the friend of David to be a foreign god's vassal. Right? The way you get named in the Bible is your name means something. It's not just a name, right? You're not just Aiden. Like your family named you something because it meant something, right? So if your name has a idol's name in it, right? Baal is the god that's the rival of Yahweh in the Book of Kings. No. Oh, that's not his name. We're going to fix that. Right, that's what I'm saying. But they have to code it so that you know what the name was So that's why they use the boshet, right? Because it starts with the same consonant. It starts with the vav, the bet. But it's like the dang nabbit. We're using a euphemistic name here. Anyways, okay. So it says, David, is there anyone left of the house of Saul that I may show kindness for Jonathan's sake? Okay, here's the problem. Now that Michal has been cut off, right, she's been sent over to the harem and we're not going to see her anymore. Exit stage left. David has to fulfill his promise to his friend Jonathan. Except that there's no one left. Saul's dead, Jonathan's dead, Ishmael's dead, Michal, she's over the harem. I can't do any kindness. But I have this promise I have to fulfill, because if I don't fulfill my promise, then I'm not a righteous king. Right? Daddy said we were going to have ice cream. I have to give them ice cream, is the idea. Okay? So he's like, is there someone that I can honor in Saul's household to fulfill my promise to my friend and be, out from my obligation, right? He is, your word is your bond here. Okay. Now, it says, now there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziva, and they called him David, and the king said to him, are you Ziva? And he says, yes, I am, I am your servant. And the king said, is there not yet anyone of the house of Saul that I may show the kindness of God? And Ziva said, there is still a son of Jonathan, but he is crippled in both feet. Right? And if you go back, we talked about this last time, if you go back to chapter 4, it says, now Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the report of Saul and Jonathan's death reached Jezreel, and his nurse took him and fled, and it happened in her hurry that he fell and became lame. And I explained last time that what that probably means is that since he's 5 years old, she dropped him and his leg broke. So the king and his son are dead. This is the heir. The nurse knows what's up. She knows what's about to happen. Someone's about to come kill this boy she's taking care of. So she takes him and they're about to run to escape so that they don't get killed by either the Philistines or by David. She doesn't know what's going on. She just knows she's supposed to take care of this little boy. So she picks him up, and as she's running down the stairs, she drops him, he falls, and he breaks his legs. And in the ancient world, we don't have cast, and we don't have x-rays, we don't have doctors, so if you break your legs, then you're crippled the rest of your life. That's the context. So Mephibosheth is a cripple, which means he can't be a king, right? That invalidates him, right? Because he can't be a military ruler, right? Until David unifies everyone, the king is a military ruler. You can't be a military ruler if you can't walk. That's the idea. So he says, there is a son, but he's crippled in both legs, i.e. he's not a threat to you, right? Ziva knows what's going on. He's like, David, are you trying to kill everybody? Like, I know you're the king and you have to, clean the slate, but, he's not a threat to you. He's a lame boy. And David says, where is he? And Ziva says, behold, he's in the house of Mahir, the son of Amiel, in Lo-Devar. And David sent and brought him from the house of the blah, blah, blah. And Mephibosheth, the son of David, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and prostrated him. He says, Mephibosheth, he says, here is your servant. David said to him, do not fear, for I will surely show kindness to you for the sake of your father Jonathan, and will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you will eat at my table regularly. And again, he prostrated himself as, what is your servant that you should regard a dead dog like me? Now, that phrase there, what is your servant, also occurred back at the end of chapter 7 when David is talking to God. This is, again, a formulaic way of how you show subordinates in the ancient world, right? So what Mephibosheth has just done is that David has basically said, okay, there's within every kingdom, you think about the Queen of England, within every kingdom, there's the land that she owns as the queen, and the land that she owns as her own personal property. Right? Again, it's personal union, right? She owns this castle, and this estate, because that's what her dad gave her in the will. But she also owns this, and 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 this, because she's the monarch of the nation. Right? So that's what David is saying. He says, all the stuff that belonged to your family, I'm giving back to you. All the stuff that comes as being king, I'm keeping for myself because I'm the king now, right? So it's like David would technically have gotten it because he's the son-in-law, right? But David's saying, no, I'm going to give you the stuff so that you have something to do. Why does he do that? Why is this kindness? Because Mephibosheth can't work. He has broken, crippled legs. So he's poor. is the idea. And so David is saying, this is my kindness to you. I will provide you with enough money that you can live on. I'm going to give you back all the stuff. And then the idea is, great, what in the ancient world, you have people that own the land and people that work the land, right? So Mephibosheth owns the land, Ziva works the land. Ziva's the servant, right? So Ziva is now going to be the administrator of all this land and provide for Mephibosheth's kingdom, and then Mephibosheth can have his own kids, right? So you're going to get your stuff back so that you were taken care of. And then he says, and you will eat at my table regularly. What does that mean? He says, I'm bringing you in as an advisor to me, as a trusted companion to me. Just like your father was my friend, I'm going to make you my friend. Right? Friends in the ancient world are not necessarily like, I like you, you sent me a Valentine's card, we shared a piece of candy. Friends in the ancient world are political allies that you are bringing in, right? So he's like, okay, you are the true heir of this dynasty. But there's no more dynasty anymore. I'm the king now. So I'm going to bring you in, and you're going to work for me. And by working for me, you legitimize my power. If you were to, we'll see this when we jump to the end, and I will, if I remember, we'll talk about this. At the end of the book of Kings, the same thing happens to the Judean kings. Jehoiakim goes and sits at the table of the Assyrian king. Because that says, your kingdom is now my kingdom and you work for me now. Because by giving the king, by allowing the heir to a throne, a place at your table, means that you have enough power to be able to feed him, take care of him, and control him. It's a political statement. It is kindness, it is friendship in that sense. It's not meanness, is what I'm saying. Because there's other ways to show you're powerful. I mean, you could gouge out his eyes. That happens in the Bible. That's a lovely scene. We'll talk about that. But if you're trying to extol yourself as a peaceful, righteous king who's going to rule over a vast empire, then what you do is you say, why don't you come work for me? Which is what he does here. So Mephibosheth, I'm going to give you money, and you're going to come work for me. And Mephibosheth is like, thank you for not killing me, basically. Now, when we have this whole discourse about what happens, and it's setting up some stage we're going to see later on in a few chapters. Ziva has 15 sons and 20 servants of his own. Right? Just because he works for Mephibosheth doesn't mean that he's poor. Ziva is a wealthy person himself. He has his own servants. He's a slave that owns other slaves. Right? And he has 15 kids of his own. And Mephibosheth, it says he has a son named Micah. Or Micah, probably Micah. And all who lived in the house of Ziva were the servants of Mephibosheth, right? So the idea is that Mephibosheth, he's got his head servant, Ziva, and Ziva's got all of his people that work for him, right? And now, good catch. And then now, Mephibosheth now works for David, right? So, in a economic sense, his corporation just bought out his corporation. And now your people work for me, and you work for me, right? I've formed a political alliance, I've merged the two corporations together, and I've sealed my kingdom as the only kingdom. Okay? And then it ends in chapter 10 with Amnon and Aram being defeated. Let's put those on the map. Aram is the kingdom that's up here, and Ammon is this kingdom, sorry. Ammon is up there. Okay? So, the kingdom way up here on the borderland. Aram is Tyre is sort of where Lebanon is now in our political geography, and Aram is Syria, the kingdom above that. And Aram is the hinge in Mesopotamia. When you come up from Mesopotamia, up from the Tigris and the Euphrates, and you go down the King's Highway, which is this piece of land that goes along the eastern Mediterranean, you have to go through Aram. So Aram is the crossroads. And now David has gone up there and killed, he's subdued them, which basically means David is building an empire. I mean, the next thing we should expect is that David should march down into Egypt and conquer them. Or march over into the Tigris and conquer Assyria. That's the idea, that's the context we're seeing here. So this last chapter, chapter 10, is that Ammon and Aram are defeated, right? David is trying to extend his sphere of influence and become the new empire. And with that, we're at the top of the peak, and it's all about to drop off next time. So I'll see you then.